Hi, I'm Sayla, and I thought these were some good stories to tell.
My grandmother on my father's side was quite the character. I honestly don't even know where to start.
My mother, she was born in the South in 1930s America, so before World War II. She's the youngest amongst, I think, 11 or 12 kids, and she's been working since before she was a teenager. Don't think she finished high school, and she moved to New York, and then she moved to Detroit.
This is Nathan. I'm Mildred's middle son. I'm responding to my niece Sela's request to relate a story about her that I recall. This task has some difficulty, as any story regarding her might have an equal amount of negative memories as well as some positive ones.
Okay, so one of my favorite memories from childhood was one day. It had been really bad weather and we'd been stuck in the house all day, and my brother and I were jumping around and playing because we were bored and really getting on my mother's nerves. And I guess she had told us a couple of times that we should be quiet or calm down, but every time she would leave the area, we would start playing again, and we were jumping on the bed and making noise. And she came into the room very angry. She said she had told us several times to stop, and I guess we had actually broken something, maybe a lamp, and she was going out to get a switch so that she could come back and whoop us for our bad behavior.
One of the things that she's always had a problem with was alcohol. She was an alcoholic. And she wasn't always the nicest person when she was sober, but when she drank, she was so much worse.
In an attempt to connect with her after many years apart, I invited her to fly from Atlanta to Michigan to visit my family. This is the story of how that 4-day trip turned into an 8-day nightmare. As we waited at passenger departure with great anticipation, passenger after passenger came through, but no sight of Mildred. As we went to check with airline officials about the passenger list, her name was called off over the intercom. Would anyone associated with passenger Mildred Moore please proceed to gate D17? We raced there, hearts pounding, minds wandering. The long and the short of it is that we went down the gateway to find her lying on a gurney bed with EMS working on her and foam coming from her mouth.
I had a dog named Program who was a mutt, but he was a cool mutt. And he basically ran the neighborhood. My dog did what he wanted to do. I fall asleep in that room, and I'm sort of awakened, sort of like stirred, because my dog is scratching on the door to get into the room. And he comes in, and first thing he does is kind of like run under the bed. And my mother follows him into the room. And while I'm still in the bed, she has a 12-gauge shotgun in her hand, and she shoots at the bed, or shoots under the bed. Clack, clack, clack. Metal on metal sound, right after the loudest noise I've ever heard in my life. And she said, "That damn dog was sitting on my couch, and I told him not to sit on that couch."
I just thought I should jump in here real quick and let you guys know that the dog was fine. I mean, he lost an ear, but besides that, the vet declared the dog as fine.
After she was released from the hospital, we took her home and spent a great couple of days with family, recounting stories that had somewhat of a favorable twist. She always painted herself as the saint of motherhood. I love my mother very much. However, this she was not. When it was time for her return trip, I packed her luggage in the car with great enthusiasm. As we arrived at the airport, we discovered that she had forgotten her purse, therefore her identification. We, of course, had to reschedule her flight for the next day. On the second trip to the airport, she had failed to pack her medication and refused to get on the flight without it. She had a stubborn side. On the third trip to the airport, I triple-checked everything. and made certain that she got on her flight. With a great sigh of relief, we completed her return home.
That was one of the stories. That's one of the things that happened to me between my mother and myself that never got resolved. So as I got older and I started realizing, well, wait a minute, I was actually in the bed at the time that she fired off that shell. I could have died that night, and it never occurred to her. And when she got sober, because she's not the nicest person in the world, she never said, I'm sorry. She never admitted her wrong, ever. There's a big hole in the carpet that stayed there for the rest of the time that we were in that house. That was a reminder of how I nearly died one night because a dog was on the couch.
When I asked my uncles to participate in this documentary, I knew there was a high chance of it not painting her in the greatest picture. I mean, obviously, she wasn't a perfect mother. I mean, you can even argue that she wasn't a good one, but she must have done something right. I mean, she did raise 3 black men in Detroit during the 60s, 70s, and 80s alone. When she did pass away, all 3 of her sons showed up to her memorial. It was one of the first times I saw all of them together in one room. But why should I try to end this documentary shutting her in a bright light? I can just let her sons finish their stories.
At the end of the day, she was my mother. She took care of me. She protected me when I needed protecting. And she taught me to be fearless, or to disregard my fear is more of what it was like. That's who she was.
With Mildred, life was always an adventure.
So we were really upset, and it, was the sort of worst ending of a terrible day. And so we waited, frightened and with bated breath, for her to return with the switch so we could get our, promised spanking. And she came back in the house. We could hear her coming through the door, and we just sort of sit there with our eyes closed because we didn't even want to look at her because, we didn't know how big the switch would be. And we opened our eyes and looked at her, and she was carrying 2 beautiful ice cream cones. And she said, "Here, you boys be good. I'll never forget it."